Love?
What exactly
What
is going
exactly
on
is
here?
going on here?
The venomous voice cut through the tender moments like a blade. Grace's heart stopped. She turned to see a glamorous woman standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing with fury. This had to be her, Stella, the ghost who had haunted this household for over a year. Aid instinctively stepped in front of Grace, shielding her, but the gesture only seemed to enrage the woman more. So, this is your choice, Aid, Stella sneered, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she advanced into the room. You're choosing the help over your own wife? Over your family? Grace felt her world tilting. Just moments ago, Aid had confessed his feelings for her. He had asked her to stay, not as a nanny, but as something more. And now, everything was unraveling. But how did a street sweeper from a small town near Ibadan end up in the middle of a billionaire's family drama? How did Grace go from sleeping on cardboard outside a closed shop to standing in this beautiful Lekki apartment, fighting for a love she never expected to find? If you enjoy thrilling African folktale story, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us where you are watching from. The story began 6 months earlier, on the coldest morning of Grace's life. The Lagos streets were still dark at 4:30 a.m. when Grace pushed herself up from the cardboard that served as her bed. Her bones ached from another night on the concrete outside the closed electronics shop in Lekki. The shop owner had given her permission to sleep there, a small mercy in a city that had shown her mostly cruelty. Her bones ached from another night on the concrete outside the closed electronics shop in Lekki. The shop owner had given her permission to sleep there, a small mercy in a city that had shown her mostly cruelty. She folded the cardboard carefully. It was her only possession, besides the faded dress she wore and the borrowed broom she used for work. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and even that had been just a small piece of bread. But there was no time for self-pity. Her shift started at 5 a.m., and Mr. Tunde, the supervisor, would dock her pay if she was even 5 minutes late. Grace's job was to sweep the service lane behind the row of expensive apartments on the Lekki-Epe Expressway before the residents woke up. Invisible work for invisible people. That's what her mother would have called it before she passed away 2 years ago, leaving Grace alone in the world. As she began her work that morning, pushing the broom across the pavements with mechanical precision, she had no idea that today would be different. She had no idea that in one of those expensive apartments, a man named Aid was having the worst morning of his life. A man who would change everything. But first, she had to survive this day. And judging by the angry clouds gathering overhead, even that wouldn't be easy. Daddy, they laughed at me. Aid closed his eyes, the weight of those 4 words crushing him. He looked at his 8-year-old daughter, Ada, sitting at the dining table, tears streaming down her face, her plate of food untouched. It was all his fault. He'd forgotten to do the laundry again, for the 3rd time this week. I'm so sorry, Ada, he whispered, but the words felt hollow. How many times had he apologized this month? How many times had he promised to do better? Ever since Stella left a year ago, just walked out with a note saying she needed to find herself, Aid had been drowning. He was a successful architect, designing beautiful buildings across Lagos, but he couldn't manage to keep his own life from falling apart. The living room was a disaster. Unwashed plates from 3 days ago sat on the coffee table. Ada's school books were scattered across the floor. The apartment that had once been filled with laughter now felt like a tomb. I miss Mommy, Ada said, her small voice breaking. When Mommy was here, my uniforms were always clean. She used to plait my hair every morning. He pulled her into his arms, but he had no answers, no comfort to give. He was failing her, failing at the one job that mattered most, being her father. The next morning, his best friend Femi cornered him after school drop-off. The conversation was blunt and necessary. You need help, Aid. A nanny, someone to manage the house so you can actually be a father instead of just surviving.
Aid had resisted, but deep down, he knew Femi was right. He was drowning, and Ada was drowning with him. He had no idea that the help he desperately needed was currently sleeping on cardboard just 3 blocks away, or that she would become so much more than he ever imagined. Grace first saw him 2 weeks before the interview. She was sweeping the service lane when she noticed a little girl sitting alone outside the school gate, looking lost and scared. The other children had already been kicked up, but this girl sat there, her school bag clutched to her chest, tears threatening to spill. Grace couldn't just walk past. "Hello, little one," she said gently, kneeling beside the girl. "Are you waiting for someone?" "My daddy," she whispered. "He's always late." They sat together for 20 minutes. Grace told her stories about growing up in Ibadan, about the time she saw a monkey steal mangoes from the market. The girl laughed, a beautiful sound, and Grace felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. When a hurried man in a business suit finally rushed up, apologizing profusely, Grace saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt, the barely contained panic of a parent who was trying his best and failing. "Thank you," he said to Grace, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for staying with her." Grace had simply nodded and returned to her sweeping. She didn't know his name, didn't know that he was one of Lagos's most promising young architects, didn't know that he lived in one of the apartments whose service lane she cleaned every morning. She certainly didn't know that in 2 weeks, his friend would find her through a domestic staffing agency, or that she would walk into that same man's apartment for an interview that would change everything. But fate, it seemed, had its own plans. When Grace rang the doorbell of apartment 12B, her heart was pounding. She had borrowed a clean blouse from the agency's office, braided her hair neatly, and prayed that this interview would go well. She desperately needed this job. Another night on cardboard, and she wasn't sure she'd have the strength to keep going. The door opened. Grace's breath caught. It was him, the hurried father from the school gate. Eight's eyes widened in recognition. "You're the woman from the school." "Yes, sir." Something shifted in the air between them. Eight stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. The apartment was tidier than she expected, though she could see the evidence of a rushed cleaning. Papers hastily stacked, cushions straightened but not quite right. This was a home trying desperately to appear put together. The interview should have been formal, professional, but there was already a connection between them, forged in that moment outside the school when Grace had shown kindness to a stranger's child. Aid asked about her experience, her references, why she had left her last job. Grace answered honestly, her voice calm despite her racing heart. She mentioned the family that had relocated to the UK, but she didn't mention the cardboard outside the shop. Some truths were too raw to share. "This job is not easy," Aid said finally, his professional mask slipping. "My daughter's mother is not with us. It's just the two of us. The house is often a mess. I work long hours. Ada, she's been very sad lately." Grace met his eyes. "Children need stability," she said softly. "They need routine, and they need to know they are loved." Something in Aid's chest cracked open. This woman understood. This stranger saw the exact thing he had been failing to provide. "You are hired," he said, the word surprising even himself. Grace's eyes widened. "Sir?" "You are hired," he repeated. "Can you start tomorrow?" As Grace walked out of that apartment, her borrowed blouse sticking to her back with nervous sweat, she allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing. That night, she didn't sleep on cardboard. The agency had a small room for their staff between placements, and Grace spent her last night there dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly bright. She had no idea that she wasn't just taking a job. She was walking into a family that would claim her heart completely. A family that would fight for her even when she was ready to walk away. But first, she had to prove herself. The change was immediate. On Grace's first morning, she arrived to find Aid rushing around the apartment like a tornado, trying to get himself and Ada ready. The kitchen was chaos. Ada looked small and miserable, still withdrawn from the previous day's teasing at school. "Let me," Grace said simply, setting down her bag. Within 30 minutes, the apartment smelled of fresh pancakes. Ada sat at the table, eating slowly, her eyes wide with surprise. Aid stood in the doorway, watching in amazement as this stranger brought order to his chaotic world. "I packed some for your lunch too," Grace told Ada gently. "And I noticed your uniform was clean in the dryer. Let me press it for tomorrow." Ada looked at her father, then back at Grace. She didn't smile, not yet, but something in her small face softened. That evening, Aid came home to a sight that nearly brought him to tears. The living room was spotless, papers were organized, the floor gleamed, and from the living room came a sound he hadn't heard in over a year, his daughter's laughter. Ada and Grace were on the floor playing Ludo, and Ada's face was lit up with genuine joy. "Daddy, you're home," she cried, scrambling up to hug him. "Grace and I were playing. I'm winning." Aid looked at Grace over her daughter's head. She was smiling at them, and something in his chest tightened. Not attraction, not yet. Just a profound, overwhelming gratitude. This was what a home should feel like. In the days that followed, the transformation continued. Grace braided Ada's hair in intricate styles that made the little girl beam with pride. She helped with homework, turning math problems into games. She left little notes in Ada's lunchbox. "You're a star," and "Have a wonderful day." Ada began to bloom. The sad, withdrawn childhood hidden from her friends slowly disappeared, replaced by a bright, cheerful girl who couldn't stop talking about Auntie Grace. And Aid, for the first time in a year, he wasn't just surviving, he was actually living. He slept better. He ate proper meals. At work, his designs flowed more easily, no longer blocked by the constant anxiety about what disaster awaited him at home. He started coming home on time, eager to spend evenings with his daughter, with Grace. He told himself it was just gratitude, just relief at having help. But late at night, lying in bed listening to Grace humming in the kitchen as she prepared the next day's lunch, he couldn't deny the warmth spreading through his chest. It felt dangerously like hope. It felt dangerously like something more. But Aid had rules: professional distance, no complications. He'd been burned by loved ones, and he wasn't ready to risk that pain again. If only his heart had listened. The turning point came on a rainy Lagos afternoon. Aid had managed to finish work early, a rare occurrence. The sky had opened up, transforming the streets into rivers, and he decided to surprise Ada by picking her up from school himself. When he walked into the apartment, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. The living room was cozy and warm, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. Ada and Grace were curled up on the sofa, a blanket spread over their laps. Grace was reading a storybook aloud, her voice soft and expressive. Ada's head was resting against Grace's shoulder, her eyes wide with captivation. They hadn't noticed him standing in the doorway. Aid watched them, frozen. This scene, this perfect, peaceful, loving scene, was everything he had lost when Stella left. Everything he thought was gone forever. But here he was, rebuilt by a woman who'd entered their lives as hired help and become something so much more. Grace looked up and saw him. Her face broke into a surprised, welcoming smile that hit Aid like a physical force. "Daddy," Ada scrambled up the sofa to hug him. "Grace was reading me a story about a brave princess." Aid hugged his daughter, but his eyes never left Grace's face. "Welcome home, sir," she said softly. "Please, Grace." The words came out before he could stop them. "Call me Aid." A blush colored her cheeks, but she nodded. "Okay, Aid." That evening,
The professional barriers between them crumbled. They talked more freely over dinner, sharing stories and dreams. Aid learns that Grace had grown up poor but happy, that her mother had died leaving her with nothing, that she had struggled in Lagos but never lost her kindness. Grace learned that Aid had once been carefree and optimistic, that his marriage to Stella had been passionate but ultimately toxic, that he blamed himself for not being able to keep his family together. Ada, sensing the shift, fell asleep on the sofa between them, a content smile on her face. When Aid carried her to bed, he returned to find Grace still in the living room, her hands folded in her lap, looking uncertain. "Grace," he said, sitting beside her, his heart hammered against his ribs. "Thank you for everything you've done for us, for Ada, for me." She turned to him, her beautiful eyes soft in the dim light. "You don't have to thank me, Aid. She paused, as if afraid to finish the sentence. "You what?" he prompted gently. "I care about you both," she whispered. "So much." The air between them was electric. Aid knew he should maintain the boundaries he'd set, knew he should keep this professional. But his heart, his traitorous, hopeful heart, was already gone. He reached out and took her hand. Just that simple touch sent warmth flooding through him. "I care about you too, Grace," he admitted. "More than I should, more than is probably wise." They sat there in the quiet living room, hands clasped, neither knowing what came next, but both knowing that something fundamental had shifted. The house that had been broken was healing, and so were the people inside it. For happiness, Aid would soon learn, never comes without a price, and the ghost of his past was about to come crashing back into their fragile new world. It happened on a Friday evening when everything was perfect. Aid was reviewing architectural plans on the sofa. Grace was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared dinner. Ada was in her room, doing homework. It was an ordinary, beautiful evening, the kind Aid had stopped believing was possible. Then, the phone rang. He answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice he hadn't heard in over a year. "Aid, it's me." His blood ran cold. Every muscle in his body tensed. "Stella!" Grace, hearing the name, stopped humming. The kitchen went silent. "Is that any way to greet your wife?" Stella's voice was light, casual, as if they'd just spoken yesterday, as if she had abandoned them without a word. "You are not my wife," Aid said sharply. "Not anymore." Details, she laughed. "Anyway, I have wonderful news. I'm back in Lagos." Panic seized Aid's chest. "Back in Lagos? Why?" "And I want to see Ada," Stella continued, her voice taking on a demanding edge. "She is my daughter, after all. I'll come by the house tomorrow." "No," Aid said immediately. "You can't just show up here whenever you feel like it. You lost that right when you left." Stella laughed, that grating sound that brought back a flood of painful memories. "Don't be so dramatic, Aid. I'm her mother. I have every right to see her. I'll be there around noon. Make sure she's ready." The line went dead. Aid stood frozen, phone still pressed to his ear, his hands shaking. The peace he had felt just moments before had shattered into a million pieces. All the old feelings, anger, betrayal, hurt, came rushing back, suffocating him. Stella was back. The ghost had returned. Grace walked out of the kitchen, her face pale. "Aid," she asked softly, "is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He looked at her, this woman who had so gently put his life back together, and felt a wave of fear. What if Stella's return destroyed everything they'd built? What if he lost Grace the way he lost everything else? "It was my ex-wife," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's back in Lagos. She wants to see Ada." Grace's expression shifted. Concern, sadness, and something else. Understanding. She put down the dish towel and came to stand before him. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Aid admitted. "I don't know." For the first time since Grace had entered his life, he felt truly lost again.
The storm he thought was over had just returned with hurricane force, and he had no idea how to protect the people he loved from what was coming. Aid couldn't keep it in. The professional boundary he'd tried to maintain felt foolish now. He needed to talk to someone, and Grace, with her calm, steady presence, felt like the only safe harbor in his sudden storm. "I need to tell you something," he said, gesturing to the sofa. "About Stella. About my marriage."
Grace sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes full of quiet empathy. She didn't speak, just waited. And so Aid talked. For the first time since Stella left, he opened up completely. He told Grace about the early days of his marriage, how happy they'd been, how Stella had slowly changed, becoming restless and dissatisfied, always searching for something more. She felt trapped, Aid explained, the words painful to speak. She said being a wife and mother wasn't enough for her, that she needed to find herself. His voice broke. "And then one day, I came home from work, and she was just gone. A note on the table. That was it." Grace's eyes filled with tears for him, but she remained silent, letting him purge the poison that had been festering in his heart. For a whole year, Grace, a whole year of nothing, no calls, no messages. Ada kept asking when Mommy was coming home, and I had to lie to her because I didn't know how to explain that her mother had simply stopped wanting us. "I'm so sorry, Aid," Grace whispered. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you and for Ada." Aid looked at her, expecting pity or judgment. Instead, he found only understanding. "I don't know what to do," he confessed. "I don't want Ada to get hurt again. Stella's return will only confuse her. She's finally happy. We're finally happy." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Ada is a smart and resilient girl," she said carefully, "but she is also sensitive. You're right to want to protect her." She paused, then added softly, "But you don't have to face this alone. You and Ada are a team, and I'm here to help in any way I can." Her words were a lifeline. The burden on Aid's shoulders suddenly felt lighter, as if Grace had taken a piece of it for herself. "Thank you, Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." They sat in silence, a new, deeper connection forming between them. It was no longer employer and employee. It was two people sharing vulnerability, two souls connecting in a quiet, unexpected way. As the evening wore on, and they talked more about fears, about hopes, about the uncertain future, Aid realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. He was falling in love with Grace. Not just grateful, not just relieved, actually deeply, completely in love with Grace. The thought should have scared him more, but as he looked at her beautiful, kind face, he felt only certainty. Whatever storm was coming, he wanted to face it with her by his side. He just had to find the courage to tell her. That night, Grace lay in her small guest room, staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy. Stella was back, Ada's real mother. Grace had known this job was temporary. From the beginning, she was the help, the hired nanny, the woman paid to fill a gap. She knew better than to get attached. But she had gotten attached. Desperately, completely attached. She loved Ada like her own daughter. She loved the routine they'd built, the laughter, the simple joy of braiding hair and helping with homework. She loved the way Ada's face lit up when she came home from school. She loved being needed. And Aid. Grace pressed her hand to her chest, where her heart ached with a feeling she had tried to deny for weeks. She loved Aid. She loved his rare smiles, the way his entire face softened when he looked at Ada. She loved his quiet strength, his determination to be a good father despite his exhaustion. She loved the way he had slowly opened up to her, sharing his fears and hopes. But loving him was foolish, dangerous. She was a street sweeper who had been sleeping on cardboard
just months ago. He was a successful architect from a good family. She had nothing. He had everything. And now his wife, ex-wife, he'd said, but were they really divorced? Was back, wanting to reclaim her family. She knew what she had to do. She had to leave before this got more complicated, before her heart got more broken, before Ada got confused about who Grace really was. She rose from bed and quietly pulled out her small suitcase. She began to pack her few belongings, tears streaming silently down her face. She'd give her notice in the morning, tell Ada that she thought it was best to leave now that Ada's mother was back. Make it clean, professional. She folded her clothes with shaking hands, each item a reminder of the life she was about to walk away from. She didn't hear the door open, didn't realize Aid was standing there until he spoke. "Grace!" His voice was raw with emotion. "What are you doing?"
She turned, startled, tears still wet on her cheeks. "I'm packing, sir." "Aid," she corrected herself. "I think it's best if I leave now that Ada's mother is back. You don't need me anymore." The words were like knives, but she forced them out. Aid stepped into the room, and the expression on his face, pain, panic, determination, made her breath catch. "No," he said firmly, "that's not true. We do need you. I need you." What happened next would change everything. Aid crossed the room and gently took Grace's hands, stopping her from packing. "Please don't go," he said, his voice breaking. "You're the one who has been here. You're the one who brought light back into our lives. Ada doesn't need Stella. She needs you." He took a deep breath, his heart pounding so hard Grace could probably feel it. "Grace, I know I set a lot of rules when you first came. I told you to keep a professional distance, but I can't do that anymore. I've tried to fight it, but I have feelings for you. Strong feelings." Grace stared at him, her lips parted in shock. "I don't want you to be our nanny anymore," Aid continued. "I want you to be part of our family. I want you to stay. With me. With us." "Aid," Grace whispered, tears spilling over. I have feelings for you too. From the very first day I saw you, I felt a connection, but I never thought I didn't want to overstep." Relief flooded through Aid. He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "There are no boundaries to overstep anymore," he said softly. He leaned in, about to kiss her to seal this incredible moment. "What exactly is going on here?" They both spun around. Stella stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face twisted with fury. She'd come back early, and she'd heard everything. "So this is your choice, Aid," she sneered, stepping into the room. Her designer dress and perfectly styled hair made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine, but her expression was pure venom. "You are not my wife, Stella," Aid said, his voice calm and steady. "And our family is right here." Stella's face twisted. "How dare you? After everything we've been through, you're throwing it all away for a housekeeper?" She pointed at Grace. You came into my home and you stole my family." Grace flinched, but Aid squeezed her hand behind his back. "No one stole anything, Stella," Aid said. "You gave it away. You walked out on us. You left your daughter without a word for a year. That was your choice." "I made a mistake," she cried, her anger turning to desperate tears. I came back for you, for Ada." "You didn't come back for us," Aid said, the truth crystal clear. "You came back for yourself. You think you can just press a button and rewind our lives, but life doesn't work that way. We've moved on." "Moved on?" Stella scoffed, looking at Grace with disgust. "With her?" That's when Ada appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. Her small face was pale with fear, her eyes darting between her parents and Grace.
Stella saw her opening. She softened her voice immediately, kneeling with open arms. Ada, my baby, come to mommy. This woman is trying to take your place. Don't you want your real mommy back? The room held its breath. Ada looked at Stella, this glamorous stranger who'd reappeared in her life. Then she looked at Grace, who had braided her hair every morning, helped with her homework, read her bedtime stories, made her feel safe and loved. Slowly, deliberately, Ada walked past her biological mother. She took Grace's hand and held on tight. The gesture was simple, but it was everything. Stella stared at them, her face crumbling. She had played her final card and lost. Truly, completely lost. Fine, she whispered, all the fight draining from her. Fine. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, out of the apartment, out of their lives. The front door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the apartment. The storm had passed. After Stella left, a thoughtful quiet settled over the apartment. They were a family of 3 now. But the lines were uncertain. Grace was no longer just a nanny, but not quite a mother either. Aid was no longer just her employer, but they hadn't defined what they were to each other.
That evening at dinner, Ada broke the silence. "So, are you my new mommy now?" she asked Grace, her voice a mix of hope and confusion. Grace looked at Aid, a blush rising on her cheeks. Aid smiled and reached for her hand across the table. "Grace is going to be a very special part of our family, honey," Aid explained. "But these things take time. For now, how about you call her Auntie Grace?" Ada thought about it, then nodded, a bright smile spreading across her face. "Okay, Auntie Grace." The name felt right, a bridge between past and future. Later, after Ada was in bed, Ada and Grace found themselves alone in the living room. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a shy new intimacy. "Thank you for staying," Ada said softly. "Thank you for asking me," Grace replied, her eyes shining. He moved closer. "I meant what I said, Grace. I love you." "I love you too, Aid," she whispered. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Slow, tender, full of all the unspoken emotions of the past few months. A kiss of gratitude, relief, and hopeful beginning. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. The future was uncertain. They had much to figure out. How to be a couple, how to build a new family on the foundation of a broken one. But as they sat there, holding hands in the quiet living room, they knew they could face it all together. The apartment in Lekki had transformed into a true home. The walls displayed Ada's colorful drawings. The air was filled with laughter and music. Gone was the heavy silence of grief, replaced by the comfortable rhythm of family life. Today was special. Grace's birthday. Aid, Ada, and Femi, who'd become a frequent visitor and their biggest cheerleader, had decorated the living room with balloons and streamers. When Grace emerged from her room that afternoon in the blue dress Aid had bought for her, she was greeted with a loud chorus of "Happy birthday!" Her face lit up with pure joy. Aid kissed her lovingly. "Happy birthday, my love." Femi grinned. "Happy birthday, Grace. Thank you for saving my friend from himself." Everyone laughed. Femi had been right all along. Grace was exactly what Aid and Ada needed. But the most special moment came from Ada. She ran to Grace holding a large handmade card. On the front was a drawing of the 3 of them holding hands beneath a bright smiling sun. Grace opened it. Inside, in Ada's neatest handwriting, "To Auntie Grace, the best mom in the whole world. I love you. From Ada. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She knelt and pulled Ada into a fierce hug. Oh, Ada, I love you too. Aid wrapped his arms around them both, completing their family circle. They stood there for a long moment, a perfect picture of a family made not by blood or chance, but by love and choice. Later that evening, after the small party, after Ada was asleep, Ada and Grace sat on the sofa holding hands. This was the best birthday I've ever had, Grace said, her head on his shoulder. It's just the first of many, Aid promised, kissing her head. He looked around his home, at the colorful balloons, the remnants of celebration. He thought about the journey they had been on, the pain, the healing, the fear, and the love. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Grace had walked into his life when he was broken and taught him how to hope again. Together, they had built something beautiful and strong. The house was no longer empty. It was full of love. And that is all that mattered. Sometimes Grace still thought about the cardboard outside the electronics shop in Lekki, about the cold mornings when she'd wake up aching, wondering how she'd survive another day. She thought about the borrowed broom, the meager wages, the constant hunger, the loneliness that had threatened to swallow her whole. From street sweeper to beloved mother figure, the journey seemed impossible when she looked back on it. But it had happened. One act of kindness at a time, one day at a time, one choice at a time. She'd stayed with a frightened little girl outside a school gate. She'd accepted a job when she could have walked away. She'd loved when it would have been safer to keep her distance. And in return, she'd been loved, chosen, made part of a family that fought for her when the past tried to reclaim them. On quiet mornings now, she'd wake up in the comfortable guest room, soon to be their shared room once Ada had finalized the divorce papers. She'd hear Ada humming in her bedroom, Ada brewing coffee in the kitchen. She'd hear the sounds of home, of family, of love. And she'd whisper a prayer of gratitude for the billionaire architect who'd seen past her poverty to the woman beneath, who'd been brave enough to choose love over the comfort of familiar pain. Their story wasn't over. They had a wedding to plan, adoption papers to file. Ada wanted to make it official. Ada wanted Grace to be her mother legally, not just in their hearts. They had a future stretching before them, bright with possibility. From cardboard to queen of her own castle, from invisible to essential, from alone to beloved. Grace's story, a modern Lagos fairy tale, has been patience, kindness, and the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish. A street sweeper who swept her way into a billionaire's heart and changed everything forever. Thank you for watching this inspiring African urban tale. If you enjoyed Grace and Ada's journey from brokenness to healing, from loss to love, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming African stories, and hit the notification bells so you never miss a new upload. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what part of the story touched your heart most. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.